Now that we've looked at the Enlightenment, studied the philosophers and their various political ideals, it's time to look at precisely how those ideals were put in action. We're going to do that by looking more closely, as a case study, at the French Revolution, which began in 1789. And we're going to explore the French Revolution specifically through a class simulation. So what follows here are the procedures with a little bit of background information about the simulation. By the end of the 18th century, France had struggled through a time of imperial contradiction. Politically, the empire's colonies were attacked by others. Socially, the population was growing, but the vast majority of that population had no political voice. Economically, France was struggling to repay debt. By the time we get to the 1780s, France is under the reign of King Louis XVI and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette. France's 18th century wars included the War of Austrian Succession, where France tried to gain territory at the expense of the Holy Roman Empire when a woman, Maria Theresa, inherited the Austrian throne, and the 7 Years' War, in which, in the Americas, the French allied with the Native Americans against the British. In Europe, the French again tried to gain land at the expense of the Holy Roman Empire, and in South Asia, Britain and France fight it out for control of India. Both wars were costly, and in both wars, France effectively lost land and prestige. France's increasing debt led both Louis XV and his son, Louis XVI, to raise taxes in an attempt to raise money to pay back that war debt. French society of the late 18th century was essentially divided as it had been since the late Middle Ages or Renaissance. The First Estate, the Roman Catholic clergy of France, numbered about 150,000. Because of their spiritual calling, they were seen as the highest rank of people. While a few clergy members wielded significant power, most of them were only regionally powerful, and some simply had authority in and around their parish communities. The Second Estate was France's nobility, including the royal family, and they numbered around 200,000. While the nobles, as a group, tended to control the political situation in France, only some of France's nobles were politically powerful, and that's thanks in part to the work of Louis XIV in the previous century. In the France of the 1780s, the majority of political power still lay with the king. The Third Estate was legally divided up into two designations, the bourgeoisie and the peasants and urban poor. The bourgeoisie was made up of about 2 million people. These were the wealthy urban dwellers who, during the Renaissance, had benefited from the power of trade. French law stipulated that only members of the bourgeoisie could engage in trade. While wealthy, though, the bourgeoisie had very little political voice, since they were a part of the Third Estate and therefore the lower level of society. Now, the peasants and urban poor were the vast majority of the French population. Peasants were agricultural workers who lived primarily in rural areas, and urban poor were artisans, craftsmen, and laborers who sometimes lived in rural areas, but usually lived in cities or towns, places where they could find regular work and regular customers. France's social designations had economic effects as well. The First Estate was tax-exempt. Now, this is significant because not only did the clergy not pay an income tax, they also didn't pay any tax on the land that they owned. And the Roman Catholic Church was really the largest landholder in all of France. The clergy also did not pay the tithe. The tithe was a customary 10% of one's income, which was paid to the church. Now, in theory, the church clergy collected these monies, they sent them off to Rome, and in Rome, these monies would be redistributed across Europe to benefit the people. In practice, the money didn't always make it to Rome. The Second Estate, like the First Estate, was also tax-exempt. They paid no tax on their income and no tax on their land. But the Second Estate did pay the tithe to the church, and so they did have some money going out of their treasury. In France, the Third Estate paid both taxes and the tithe. That means that they paid money to the state for income and or for land, and the tithe to the church. Now, at first glance, this may seem like a good thing, right? 26 million French people were paying taxes, while only 350,000 were exempt. However, when you consider that the Third Estate, and particularly the peasants and the urban poor, lived at or below the poverty line, then it seems clear why France never quite raised enough money to pay off their national debt. All right, that's enough of the background information. Now let's talk about the process and procedure for our simulation. Now, first of all, everyone will receive a folded RIPS and Rs balance sheet. Now, these are color-coded by class. You will record all of your simulation transactions on this sheet. It's going to reflect your life as an 18th century inhabitant of France. If you look closely at the balance sheet, you kind of get a sense of what's going on. Now, obviously, you'll always be known by your name, but pay close attention. Everyone is going to have a role, a character, to play for the simulation, and that character will belong to a faction. And that faction will be one of the 4 designations. You'll be First Estate, Second Estate, Third Estate Bourgeoisie, or Third Estate Peasant Urban Poor. So how exactly will this RIPS balance sheet work? Well, it's pretty simple. Whenever you earn RIPS, whenever you earn income, you will record it as a credit and add it to your total. You're going to have to be sure that you note what the transaction was on your RIPS balance sheet. So as you see here, someone got paid for working. Their credit is 15, and they're going to total their new amount of money. Instead of just 100 RIPS, they now have 115. Whenever you have to pay something or someone, you're going to record it as a debit, and you're going to subtract it from your total, also recording the transaction. Now here on our altered balance sheet, somebody had to pay the tail tax. That amount was 7.2 RIPS, so their new total is 115 minus 7.2, or 107.80 RIPS. Now on the back of your folded RIPS balance sheet is your Rs balance sheet. And Rs is a unit of land measurement like an English acre. Now, if you look at your Rs balance sheet kind of closely, what you're going to see is that it has a ratio, RIPS to Rs, and it's right here. For the sake of the simulation, and anytime we talk just generally about the value of land, we're going to assume that 1 Rs is equal to 10 RIPS. So that's pretty valuable, really. That said, when you buy and sell land from one another, you can negotiate the price of that Rs. You can negotiate it up, and it can be more expensive than 10 RIPS, or you can negotiate it down, and it can be cheaper than 10 RIPS. That's going to be entirely up to the 2 negotiators. So how do you fill out your Rs balance sheet? It's almost exactly the same as your RIPS balance sheet. If you buy Rs, the first thing you're going to do is record it as a buy on the Rs chart and determine your new total Rs holdings, as you can see here on the chart. Somebody bought land from Remy, they bought 2 Rs, so now instead of just having 5, they have 7 Rs. However, since those Rs have a value and you did purchase them, you also have to record as a debit the payment for those Rs. So after you record it on the Rs balance sheet, flip back to your RIPS balance sheet, and you're going to note the transaction where you purchased land. As 1 Rs is equal to 10 RIPS, we're going to say that the 2 Rs is worth 20 RIPS, and now you're going to deduct those 20 RIPS from your balance sheet. If you sell Rs, of course, the situation is reversed. You're going to record it as a sell on the Rs chart and determine your new total of Rs holdings. So here you sold lands to Alphonse. You sold 3 Rs of land, so now instead of having 7 Rs, you've only got 4. However, since Alphonse purchased your Rs, that means he's got to pay you 30 RIPS. So you're going to record that as a transaction, sold land, 30 RIPS under credits, and then you add the 30 to your previous total. Please note, very, very important, every time you buy or sell land, you must record that transaction with the banker. Every single class is going to have a separate banker for the simulation. You also have to keep track of the sheet as a whole because you're going to turn it in at the end of simulation. If you would like, you can certainly leave it in the classroom. The suggestion is to put it in your class folder for the assignment box so that you don't have to worry about losing it between classes. And then, of course, make sure you turn it in on the last day of the simulation. A couple of other notes before we conclude. One of the important aspects of the simulation is pressure cards. Pressure cards mimic specific events from the French Revolution, and at times you're going to hear me say pressure card quite loudly in class. Whenever you hear me say that, everyone needs to stop whatever they're doing and listen for the text of the pressure card. This is important because as I read out the text of the pressure card, it may have specific ramifications for your character in the simulation, and you may have to record those consequences on your RIPS balance sheet. So listen for the words pressure card whenever I read out the text, and it will always be accompanied with the actual event that it is supposed to mention. Then record it, if necessary, on your balance sheet. And finally, everyone will have a specific role to play, vast majority male, one female, that'll be Queen Marie Antoinette, and everyone will have a faction. And again, the faction will be one of the 4 estate categories: first estate, second estate, third estate bourgeoisie, or third estate peasant and urban poor. And every day, your faction folder will include the instructions of the simulation for that day. So when you come into class, read through the daily instructions, ask me any questions that you might have about those instructions, and then just go with the simulation. The simulation is all about the students interacting with one another, teachers there to clarify, call out pressure cards, but other than that, just simply to enjoy the simulation. And finally, while the goal of the simulation is to really understand and learn about the French Revolution and these applications of Enlightenment ideals, of course, we're also supposed to have fun. So I hope you enjoy the simulation, which will run for the next several days. And again, as questions arise over the course of the simulation, please don't forget to just ask your teacher for clarification.